Good evening and welcome to the Western Region's 13th Annual Rubin Lecture of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. We are Linda and Tony Rubin. The museum has been a priority for us since we walked through its doors during its inaugural year. The museum's work is crucial and never-ending. We support its commitment to teaching, defending, and remembering the truth of the Holocaust by confronting and revealing hate all over the world in the hope that this will lead to more accepting human beings and times. We created the Rubin Lecture to bring the work of this museum to the Western region. These lectures have been extremely enlightening and moving, and tonight is even more so. Virginia Hall was an American-born woman, fearless and determined, who arrived in France in 1940 to fight enemies of the Allies, especially the Nazis. She was on the Third on the Reich's most wanted list. Her life teaches us that our choices and actions absolutely matter and can make a difference. We hope she will inspire you and challenge you. As we are coming to you live, feel free to submit your questions by posting them in the comment section. Our guests will respond to them and to as many as possible. And now it is our pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator, Nadia Ficara, Director of VIP Guests.
Thank you, Linda and Tony. Virginia Hall was born to a life of privilege on April 6, 1906 in Baltimore, Maryland. She spent much of her childhood at Boxhorn Farm with her parents and her older brother, John. A natural athlete, she loved sports and the outdoors and coveted hunting with her family on the family grounds. For 12 years, she attended Roland Park Country School for Girls, which still operates today. Her classmates knew there was something special about Virginia, whom they called Dindy, almost foreshadowing the life she would lead in an entry in her senior yearbook. And I quote, "Though professing to hold man in contempt, Dindy is yet his closest counterpart in costume. She is, by her own confession, cantankerous and capricious, but despite it all, we would not do without her, for she is our class president, the editor-in-chief of this book, and one of the mainstays of the basketball and hockey teams. She has been acclaimed the most original of our class, and she lives up to her reputation at all times. The one thing to expect from Dindy is the unexpected." Virginia did not disappoint. By 1941, she was deeply embedded in France, using a slew of aliases and building up her operational base. Eventually, the Nazis would call her the enemy's most dangerous spy. At the end of the war, she became World War II's most decorated civilian, receiving England's Order of the British Empire and France's Croix de Guerre with Palm for her work in covert operations. Virginia would also become the first and only American woman to date to receive the United States Distinguished Service Cross. Tonight, we speak with the people who know her best. Her 91-year-old niece, Lorna Catling, and Lorna's son, Brad Catling, who has and continues to do extensive research on his great-aunt. Also joining the conversation is Janelle, Deputy Director of the CIA Museum. For security reasons, we'll only use Janelle's first name, and know the irony of that is not lost on us. Thank you all for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having us.
Janelle, I think I'd like to start with you with a basic question, which is, how does a wealthy, well-educated young woman from Baltimore, Maryland, end up becoming a spy in France in the middle of World War II?
A lot of it goes back to her childhood. Her family's lifestyle really allowed her the opportunities to not just travel overseas, but to study in places like Austria and France, where she was able to learn the language and spoke it fluently. But something that you can't learn in a classroom is the nuances of everyday life in an area. And this is really important if you want to be a successful spy. You want to be able to blend in with sort of all of your surroundings and the people that are around you. And that's hard to do in a classroom sometimes. So she had that experience from her travels. She also did theater when she was growing up. She was in the plays at school, and having that background really allowed her to dive into her disguises and her cover, especially when the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which was the predecessor to my organization, the CIA here in the United States, they sent her in as an old woman, and she really had to change the way she walked, her posture, things of that nature. So that theater background helped her. Another thing was growing up, you mentioned she would spend time on her family farm. Her father, I think, saw the adventurous side in this little girl and actually taught her how to use weapons. She knew how to shoot various guns. And so she learned how to hunt, and that skill came in handy when she went through the British SOE, the Special Operations Executive Training. One of the things she had to do was shoot weapons, and she did well at that. The State Department was a big part of how she ended up becoming a spy. She was able to work for the US State Department and travel all around the world. And while she was there, they didn't take her into the Foreign Service. And so she actually left to become an ambulance driver. And that gave her some time in the country right in the lead up to the war that gave her some ground truth, which is really important.
So Brad, we know that Barbara, her mother, really wanted her to marry into high society, but she had other plans. She wanted to become a diplomat. But she didn't pass the State Department entrance exam. She did get hired as a consular clerk with assignments at American embassies overseas. But what happened during her 1933 posting in Turkey that would change her life?
Well, she took the opportunity. She had made good friends while she was there, and she took the shotgun, her favorite shotgun that her father had given her, out hunting one day for birds. And unfortunately, it was kind of a marshy area, and she was climbing over a fence, and somehow the gun went off, and she shot herself in the left foot. Unfortunately, the medical conditions being the way they were, gangrene set in, and she had to have her leg amputated below the knee. So, it's a good thing that it wasn't above the knee, for sure, because she was fairly ambulatory with the prosthetic leg that she was fitted with.
There was something a little unusual about that prosthetic leg. Did she give it a name?
She did. Cuthbert was its name. And
Cuthbert.
Yes, there is a story behind the name, but we won't go into that.
So Cuthbert and actually Payne would be with her for the rest of her life. Is that correct?
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Whenever she wore the prosthetic, it caused her a certain amount of pain, and of course, the more active she was, the more difficult it would be for her. But she never let it get her down. She never let it slow her down. And it's just one of the obstacles that she was able to overcome in her career. Very impressive.
Janelle, she returned to duty in November of 1934, about 11 months after the accident. While she did not ask for nor did she receive any special considerations, she still hoped to become a diplomat. Did she now have two strikes against her? Aside from being a woman, now she was a disabled one at that?
Well, she certainly faced gender discrimination, as did many women of that era. But what's interesting is if you actually look at some of her performance reviews from the State Department, which I've had access to, there's very obvious, it's not blanketed, it's not hidden, some very obvious gender discrimination. But there are actual performance reviews that call out the fact that her leg and the prosthetic did not in any way negatively affect her job, but yet somehow being a woman did. But I think it's really important to understand, like what Brad just said, that this was just one of the things that she was able to overcome. She wasn't going to let this accident stop her from doing what she wanted. And so she went back to the State Department and put in 5 more years and actually applied for the Foreign Service again. This time, it didn't work out again because the State Department had this very obscure rule where if you were missing a major limb, you could not be in the Foreign Service. And so they sort of crushed that dream. But she kind of sensed that war was knocking on Europe's door. And so she actually sent her mother a postcard in March of 1939. And I was hoping that maybe Lorna, could you read the postcard since it was to your relatives?
And so the catastrophe has come. I can't begin to express the horror I feel of this useless slaughter being embarked upon, caused by the usual enemy of the civilized world. Everything here is quiet. I am staying. Love to all, Virginia. It's a postcard to her mother in March of 39.
So, and even though it's going to be very dangerous, I mean, she realizes that no matter what sort of cause she takes up and who she joins up with, fighting the Nazis is going to be incredibly dangerous to herself. She doesn't go back to the United States, which I think speaks volume about her bravery and how much she wanted to help the people in France.
So what happens next, Janelle?
So she goes back into France. She quits the State Department again because they won't let her be a Foreign Service officer. So when you think about it, in a way, having that dream that she had held for so long crushed really changed the course of history for Virginia, and in many ways for a lot of the people that she saved and for the Allied forces in general. Had they not kept her from the Foreign Service, she never would have gone to France. What she did was she actually joined and decided to be a military ambulance driver. So this is an article from a local newspaper in Maryland that talks about this woman who just is driving ambulance in France with bombs going off next to her. So again, a very, very dangerous role. And unfortunately, it becomes too dangerous when the French surrender. And so she decides to go to London. She's still not ready to go back to the United States. What she saw in France affected her incredibly. She really wanted to make sure that she could be a part of helping the French. She saw what the Nazis were doing, and she wanted to be a part of stopping this evil that was being perpetrated on the world. And so she was in London and actually got recruited by the SOE. In so many ways, she was the perfect person at the perfect time. All of the things that she brought with her from her childhood that we already talked about, those language skills, the ability to shoot a weapon, having been in the country just a few weeks prior, understanding that ground truth, which essentially at CIA is still really important. It's knowing what is happening at a certain place at a certain time, personally, actually having eyes on it. She had all of that. So she was a great recruit for them. But it wasn't like they just put her in. Everyone the SOE recruited had to go through vigorous training, really intense stuff. So she was trained in hand-to-hand combat, knife fighting. They would wake her up in the middle of the night and scream at her in French to see if she would forget her cover, if she'd answer questions in English instead of French. They would be pretty rough on her. And all of this was in an attempt to sort of scare her into divulging information, and she never did. She was very good. And so she passed, but I think it's important to understand that she didn't have to do parachute training. Virginia was going to go in as an American journalist because the Americans had not yet joined the war. And so this allowed her, and in many ways was necessary for her to have a paper trail. They wanted her to go in by train or plane or boat so that there was that paper trail that would make sense for a journalist. So she didn't have to do the parachute training, and with her leg, that was the only thing that they really kind of gave her an out for. But I think it's important to understand that many women and men, a lot of men, did not pass SOE training, but Virginia did.
Would you mind explaining what SOE is?
Oh, sure. I think I said it at the beginning, but I talk fast. I'm from Wisconsin. It is the Special Operations Executive. It was the British version of the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services. The SOE was also known, it had a cool nickname, it was known as Churchill's Secret Army.
Great. One of the things I'd like the audience to recognize is the fact that the SOE would train 470 agents, men and women. These are the ones that passed, but only 39 of them were women. And of the 39, 13 of them died heroically. Janelle, what was Virginia's mission And how did she build her base of operation?
Virginia went in for the SOE for 15 months, and then she was actually with the American OSS for about another year. And just so that you kind of understand that, most people who were going in behind enemy lines were going in for a few weeks, maybe a few months, definitely not year plus situation. So the longer she stayed in country, the more dangerous it became for Virginia. So her saying, no, I'm okay, I want to keep going, I think again speaks to the bravery and the drive she had to help the Jewish people in France. One of the things that she needed to do immediately when she got in for the SOE was set up her circuit, or her network of spies. She was recruiting people of just the most insane variety of people. And I say that because she had prostitutes at brothels, she had nuns at convents, she had doctors, you name it. If it was someone that she vetted and felt she could trust and could provide lodging for downed pilots so that she could get them hidden and then back out of the country, or to help her hide out and be safe, anything that she could sort of set in motion was really important. She was also using people to gather intelligence, sort of the who knows what's happening, so that she could get that information back as well. One of the things that she did was she would actually set things in motion for agents that were coming in after her. So when she would send an Allied pilot back out of the country, she would make sure to send them back with very of the day ration books, money, clothing, anything that would help them come back into the country looking more of the part and having a more solid alias. One of the things that she did, though, was one of the most courageous, sort of famous things that she did during this time was she would go and do sabotage missions. So this is really important because blowing up rail systems, so all of the railroad tracks, bridges, any pressure point that the Nazis were using to bring in personnel and supplies, they could cut them off and essentially keep them from getting to other areas of the country or elsewhere in Europe, to sort of keep them from going to the front lines and fighting the Allied forces. She was often too important to go on these missions. Everything that she was doing in country really mattered a lot. She was sort of the connective tissue. And so she didn't go on all of the sabotage missions, but she would be the person that would do the location scouts for the drops to get the ammunition and the explosives. And then she would teach people how to use them and actually figure out where they were going to do these missions. And she also was able to get 12 spies that were captured and put in prison out. It's one of the most famous things that happened during the war, and it was Virginia's plan. So basically what happened was 12 of the people that were working in the area for the Allies, they were caught in a trap. There was a compromised safe house, and Virginia actually could have been caught up in this. So her amazing work ethic and her independent streak actually is what kept her safe. And that was really important because she's the one that was able to get these men out. She knew that their skills were valuable to the cause, but she also very much valued life and wanted to help them because she knew the fate that they were facing was probably death, either in prison, execution, or taken to a concentration camp. But she couldn't go to the prison herself. She was already starting to get a little too much attention, so it was far too dangerous. So what she did was she actually found one of the wives of one of the prisoners, and she trained this woman in the tradecraft of recruiting and vetting the right prison guards to bribe. This was really hard for Virginia. I don't want to say she was a control freak because I didn't know her, but everything sort of leads me to believe that this would have been very difficult for her because she couldn't vet these men herself to make sure that they were going to be trustworthy. But she trained this woman, she picked the guards and bribed them, and they were important in the escape. She also would send in supplies with the wife, but hidden inside of them were files, wire cutters, and various things that one of the men was going to use to make their own escape mechanism. She knew that there was some skills in the prison itself within the men, and so she figured out that they could make their own key. They did. They bribed a guard. She found all the safe houses they would need to kind of lay low until the heat was off, and all of this was done by Virginia, and there weren't any shots fired, and all men were able to escape.
Wow. That was, from my understanding, she got them all out in 12 minutes, which is pretty miraculous to say the least. Brad, Virginia arrived in Lyon 1941, and you recently shared this photo of her with the CIA and the museum in the hopes of identifying one member of the group, because in your research, you're pretty sure you identified everybody else. The image is all the more intriguing because of what Virginia wrote on the back, and it's possible that there's a connection to the Mauzac prison break. What does it say, and what have you been able to learn from it?
Well, the back of the photograph has. I remember this photograph from when I was much younger, and it always jumped out at me because it was such an unusual note. It basically sounds like a spy would have written it. She wrote, "The usual restaurant. The girl on the left is Attell's wife. He brought her down for the once over. She is a Jewess." There we go. And there are lots of things that I've been able to learn about this picture. First of all, you can't imagine a scene that looks more French than this one. Virginia is the person in the middle of the photo she's smoking a cigarette, which is kind of interesting in and of itself. I showed this to my mom, and she said, "Oh my, I didn't know Dindy smoked." So I guess we learned that.
In the past.
That's right. That's right. She didn't after the war. But I believe that this photo was taken about a week or so before Virginia had to leave the country and hike over the Pyrenees to escape the Nazis. And I believe that the people that you see here had actually arrived not too long before that. Actually, everybody in the picture, I think, arrived around the middle to the end of October. And they arrived in lots of different ways. The gentleman in the back, his name is Roger Lands, and he parachuted in the middle of the night. And the lady on the right, who's looking very stylish, she actually arrived by fishing boat. It was called a felucca. It was a flat deck, about a 40-foot long fishing boat that the French people were used, and actually the SOE owned one of them and used it to bring agents into southern France, mostly on the Riviera. Roger Landes ended up being an extremely effective wireless operator and circuit organizer. By the end of the war, he had thousands of French volunteers who were called the Maquis under his control, and he armed them and gave them or provided plastic explosives for them, and did an awful lot to secure southwestern France, the Bordeaux area, from the Nazis. Odette Sansom, who is the lady on the right-hand side, she ended up being a courier for several years, or about a year and a half, and then she was captured by the Nazis, and she spent over 2 years in prison, being tortured in the most brutal ways imaginable, and yet she was able to not divulge anything of importance to the enemies. So all of those people are heroes to the nth degree, and so the more I study, the more interesting this little scene becomes.
Thank you.
I'll also add that one of Virginia's jobs was to meet with all of the new spies as they came into the country, and I think that's what's happening there, because none of the people in the picture, I believe, had been there more than a couple of weeks. And so because she had been at that point there for 15 months, she was able to give them all sorts of intelligence. Some people referred to her as a travel agent or the or the secret agents. She told them how to get, how to use public transportation, where to stay, what restaurants to go to, where the German positions were, and whether there were movements that they should be aware of. And in doing that, she was able to save an awful lot of lives and prolong the spies' effectiveness, because they knew where to go and what to do.
And they stayed alive.
And they stayed alive.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The girl on the left, who Virginia refers to, might be a woman named Denise Block, who was unfortunately captured by the Nazis and executed at Ravensbrück in early 1945.
Now, Denise Block was Jewish, so she might be the Jewess that they were referring to.
Yeah.
And was Denise's husband one of the spies at Mausac?
He certainly was. Her brother, Pierre, was one of the prisoners, and actually it was his wife who worked with Virginia to set up the escape. So it was a pretty spectacular family who did all sorts of amazing things for the Allied cause.
Well, exciting to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Still a few missing, but definitely on the right track.
That's right.
Janelle, Virginia was incredibly cautious. Was her cover ever blown?
Well, Virginia had her cover, as I mentioned, as an American journalist. And so she would write stories all while trying to do all of her other clandestine operations. She had quite a few aliases that she used while she was overseas. Aliases are false identities to fake names. And so she used them to stay safe while she was in France. And she actually was given, I guess, a name that wasn't one she liked and actually put her in danger. And that was, she was known as the Limping Lady, something that I'm sure she absolutely hated, because she actually wrote about how she didn't think anyone noticed her limp. But Klaus Barbie, the Gestapo chief, the local Gestapo chief, who was known as the Butcher of Lyon, he gave her this nickname, and she became one of the most wanted women in all of France. What happened was, the group that Virginia was working with took in an agent. His name was Robert Ailish. He was a priest. She wasn't quite comfortable with him, questioned working with him more often than once. But after reaching back to SOE headquarters, they said he was bona fide, that he was working with them, and that she should essentially let her guard down and work with him as well. But unfortunately, he was actually what you would consider a double agent. He was giving information about Virginia and her network to the local Gestapo. And because of that, people in her network, her circuit, started going missing, and it became too dangerous for Virginia to stay. And so she couldn't get out anymore by train or plane or boat. So she actually had to hike through the Pyrenees, 8,000 feet high, not in nice weather. There's about 3 feet of snow. And again, given her prosthetic leg, this was something that was excruciatingly painful, because she couldn't lift her leg up over the snow like you normally would do when you're walking through snow. She had to essentially drag it behind her, which left her leg, the stump of her leg, bleeding through most of the journey. She said that it was actually one of the few times that she felt truly vulnerable.
Yeah, our audience might want to understand that her prosthetic was not like the ones we have today. It was wood and aluminum with a foot that only bent at the hinge, with a tight corset and leather straps, and it actually weighed a hefty 8 pounds. So she's literally dragging 8 pounds up with every single step that she takes. Brad, Janelle mentioned vulnerability, that Virginia had voiced her concerns and her fears. Aside from that, did she ever talk to you about that hike and tell you perhaps a little vignette?
She did. She said almost nothing about what she did during the war. She didn't think that what she did was anything special. But she did have trouble as she was walking over the Pyrenees. Again, it was 8,000 feet, and she got a radio message out to headquarters in London and said that Cuthbert, her leg, was giving her trouble. And then she got a message back very soon that said, if Cuthbert is giving you a problem, have him eliminated.
But she also said that the trip over the Pyrenees was the scariest thing that she experienced in all her years of the war.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I did want to touch back a little bit on Klaus Barbie. For those of you who are not aware, the danger that Virginia faced is really unquestionable. Klaus Barbie was responsible for the brutal torture, murder, and execution of over 4,000 people, and for the deportation of over 75,000 Jews, most of whom perished at Auschwitz. He was tracked down by Nazi hunters, Serge and Beate Klarsfeld, after the war and eventually extradited to France in 1983 to stand trial. He received a life sentence and died in prison, unrepentant, in 1991. The reason I bring this up is that in 2019, Serge and Beate Klarsfeld received the museum's highest recognition, the Elie Wiesel Award, for their continuous work on justice from the Holocaust. Janelle, so she's now escaped to Spain. And I guess the average person would say, okay, I'm out, I'm away from Klaus, I can go home now. I take it that's not what she did.
No, and actually something that I normally don't talk about, but she actually also was put in prison when she gets over the mountains in Spain. So now she's in a prison situation and still doesn't want to go back to the United States once she's released from the prison in Spain. She goes back to London, and while she's there, she asks the SOE if she can go back. Of course, they know that this is far too dangerous, but while they're figuring things out, Virginia actually sets in motion something really important for the future of the SOE. While she is in France, she keeps losing her radio operators. Doing that was incredibly dangerous, and so they were usually the first people to get picked off, unfortunately. There were German cars and trucks driving around that had devices in them that could track and hone in on signals from the radios. And so they were losing people because they would be found and either executed or sent to concentration camps. So she convinced the SOE to start training as many operatives as possible before they got sent in, so that no matter what happened to your main radio operator, other people could hopefully use it as well and keep going so that you wouldn't be dead in the water. One of the things that she didn't really have the patience for, though, was to wait for them to make a decision on what they were going to do with sending her back. So she actually trained in radio, and that was really essential because when they said, no, we're not sending you back, in true Virginia form, she says, okay, I quit. I'm going to go work for the Americans. And so after taking an allegiance to the British monarch, to the King of England, so that she could be in the SOE, she quits and now is working for the OSS. And we have no problem sending her back in because of all of the skills that she has and how effective she was while she was in France. But we know that it's too dangerous to just send her in as Virginia Hall. And so we give her a disguise and we send her in as an old woman. So we put layers and layers of clothing on her since they know that she's a tall, slender woman. We have her dye her hair gray, change her appearance. And this is where that theater background comes in handy. She actually changes the way she walks to hide her limp because, again, remember, she's known as the limping lady. And so now as an old woman, she can pretend that she has arthritis of the hip and sort of shuffle to and from places. So now she's hiding not just her physical identity of how she looks, but also how she walks. Once we get her in country, we really take advantage of all the things that she had done before. But one of the things that we hadn't yet was her language skills were really going to come in handy because as an old woman, she was going to take cows from pasture to pasture. This was all a ruse so that she could figure out drop zones. So we needed to send in supplies, personnel, things like money, ammunition, food, all sorts of things that were going to be helpful, especially in advance of the D-Day operation. And so she would scout these locations. And if she had just been doing this without the disguise and the cows, she may have drawn attention to herself. She also would make cheese and take it into the market. And while she was there to sell it, her German skills would come in handy because they thought she was French, and so she could listen in on what the Germans were planning, right? Because she could actually understand what they were saying. So she was gathering intelligence that way. But one of the things that she really did that was important was that radio transmissions. So she sent 37 messages while she was in France for the OSS. This painting right here depicts one of those moments that was really important in Virginia Hall's career with the OSS. So she is in a barn with one of her colleagues, Edmund Lebras, and he's rigged up a bicycle because there's no power in this barn. Virginia would move from place to place and do her transmissions at different times. And one of the ways she could stay under the radar was doing a transmission from somewhere that didn't have power. And so this picture, she was receiving a message via the BBC. They would sort of use the BBC as a way to send messages through poetry and song. And in this case, the poem, The Daisies Bloom Tonight, was what her cue was for a major drop coming up. And so this painting actually hangs in CIA headquarters. One of the things that I think is really important to reiterate is she sent 37 messages. So I said before that that's one of the most dangerous things you can do at all in France at the time. So 37 times she put her life in danger to get those radio signals back to SOE headquarters because they were so valuable to the Allies and what they were going to be doing in advance of D-Day.
We have a question from Shirley from Arizona, who asked whether Virginia was nominated as a Righteous Among the Nations, and states that she is certainly deserving of this honor and recognition, and I would absolutely agree. From what we understand, she has not received that honor. She did receive from England the Order of the British Empire, from France the Croix de Guerre with Palm for her work in covert operations, and she would become the first and only American to date to receive the United States Distinguished Service Cross. But what is interesting is that Virginia is a legend in the Haute Loire Valley to this day, and is called the Madonna of the Mountains. She is credited with liberating the town of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon just a few days before the Allied forces arrived. And during World War II, this small Protestant village shielded approximately 3,500 Jews. It has been shielding refugees since the 14th century and continues to do so today. And in 1990, Le Chambon and its nearby environs was definitely recognized as Righteous Among the Nations. And in 2007, another 40 individuals from this area were recognized as righteous. I have a question again for you, Janelle, and that would be, what happened to Virginia after the war?
Well, I think
she was a little bit of a adrenaline junkie, right? Now
she was, but I think more than anything, Virginia Hall was driven by her deep care of others. She was somebody who wanted to help people. And so after the war, the first thing she did was actually ask to be sent back to France to try to locate all of the people that she had been working with, people that she herself put in danger because of what she was doing. She wanted to see if they were still alive, if they had been sent to concentration camps, if were in prisons, if they were still around, if their houses were demolished by the war. She wanted to get them the money and the means to restart their lives because they had done so much for her. So I think that says a lot, again, about who she is. Yes, there may have been some adrenaline, but at her, I think her deep core, she was driven by the evil that was happening and wanting to make the world a better place. But when she does get back to the United States, as you mentioned, she becomes the first American female civilian to be awarded this Distinguished Service Cross, which we are so lucky to have on loan from the Catlings at the CIA Museum. We have a whole exhibit on Virginia Hall. What is so wonderful about this picture right here is that Virginia Hall is getting this award from General Donovan, who was the head of the OSS. That wasn't supposed to be the way it happened. So the President of the United States wanted to give Virginia Hall this award, but in true Virginia fashion, she said no to the president. She actually was more concerned about her future and being able to do clandestine work again. She wanted to be able to continue doing this kind of work for this country. And so she said no, and instead asked that Donovan give it to her in his office with only her mother present. One of the things I think also is important with Brad and Lorna being here is that Virginia actually towards the end of the war meets someone. His name's Paul, and they end up getting married. And once the CIA becomes the CIA, they live in the area. And so Virginia joins the Central Intelligence Agency. We became CIA in 1947. It took her a couple years, but she joined, and then she stayed with us until her mandatory retirement age at the age of 60.
Lorna, what was she like when she returned home?
Well, I hadn't met her before. And she arrived, excuse me, she had gray hair and she had baggy clothes, kind of lumpy. And anyways, I wasn't impressed. But about 3 months later, I saw her again and her hair was all back in the brown and pretty, and she was wearing a peck and peck suit and looked terrific. And
So she basically was wearing her disguise. She wore her disguise home.
well, she probably didn't want to bother before, wanted to get home before she fixed her hair and stuff.
Right.
I could believe that. Yeah. And she was a delight. I liked her quite well. She was very independent and sure of herself. But on the other hand, she knew how to read people, because the first Christmas she gave me, and she gave to a 16-year-old farm girl a little bottle of perfume. And I thought that was the most magnificent thing to give to me at that time.
Oh, wonderful.
Really read people, I think, is important.
That's incredibly important when you're acting as a spy.
Yeah.
And she did love her perfume, if I'm not
Well,
mistaken.
it was actually toilet water. I mean,
Yeah. Great for a 16-year-old. It works. Totally fine. Janelle, Michael from California is asking about the two pictures behind you. We do have a blow up of the one on the radio, which we talked about before. And perhaps you can talk about it a little bit more. And then you can also talk about the one over your right shoulder.
Okay. Yeah. So the actual painting, it's oil on canvas, and it's at CIA headquarters. We had it commissioned, I believe, in 2006. The French ambassador actually came and talked about how important Virginia Hall is and how respected she is by the French people. This painting is actually one of the favorite paintings among CIA workforce. And so we just recently turned it into our first ever accessible art for blind and low vision people. So now people who can't see art can actually experience a 3D tactile that you can touch. And as you touch it, sensors go off with sound effects and descriptions of the painting. And one of them is actually we found two of our retired Office of Technical Service officers who used to do radio operations, and they found a World War II era radio and recreated one of Virginia's transmissions. And so it's an in-depth audio experience and an actual feeling experience so that you can have the art in a different way. And our officers who are not blind or low vision also really enjoy it because it gives you a lot more information about what Virginia Hall did during the war while she was at CIA and her life in general. The other, I'm mirrored, sorry, the other side of me. So we have incredibly gifted officers at the CIA. There's a reason why I think our website says we hire the best and the brightest, and we really do. And we hire everything you could ever imagine, to include graphic artists and artists in general, designers. And so one of our officers was incredibly inspired by the bravery of Virginia Hall and decided to depict her as a comic book heroine. And so in this case, it's depicting her on her climb over the Pyrenees. And you can't see it, unfortunately, but there are little Easter eggs in it, kind of like the Marvel universe. We really feel that Agent Carter and Virginia Hall have a lot in common. And so he really took the bravery and the idea of this woman really being a larger than life hero. At CIA, we always say we're ordinary people who do extraordinary things. And I don't think it gets more extraordinary than Virginia Hall.
So speaking of extraordinary, Janelle, she returns to the CIA. And how is she treated there after the war?
So I think it's important to understand the time, because I know some authors have really portrayed her as sort of a victim of gender discrimination, and obviously that's the case in this country in general. After the war ends, women who filled the roles of men in factories and shops, they were sort of expected to go back to the life they had before that. And in some ways, that was the same case for women who actually served in the war. But one thing that I don't think people understand is that Virginia Hall, when she joined the CIA, she was hired as a GS-13. Now, that's incredibly high at that point in history for you to be hired into the organization, especially for a woman. So it was very obvious that the CIA respected the skills and everything that she was bringing with her. One thing that I think that people think was the discrimination is the fact that she was only promoted once to a GS-14 during her entire career with us. But Virginia Hall was the type of person who liked to sort of be in the thick of a mission. But when you're a GS-13 or a little higher, you're expected to be a leader. You're expected to be at the desk sometimes, planning the mission, teaching the next generation of officers how to do this work. You're there to figure out the who, the where, the what, the budget, the bureaucracy. And that just wasn't something Virginia thought used her skills to the fullest and that she enjoyed. And one thing that is very true in our organization is our leadership definitely has plans for where you fit. And if she didn't like what she was doing, she would sometimes switch jobs. And so that's possibly part of what prevented her from getting promoted multiple times. But she did have an amazing career. It's one of those things that I think that given her personality and what she did with the SOE and with State Department, I feel like if she was really unhappy with how she was treated at the CIA, she would have quit. But she didn't. She stayed with us until we essentially forced people to retire back then at the age of 60. So I am so glad she didn't leave, because she's such an inspiration to so many officers.
So, Janelle, what all did she do at the CIA? I mean, she's now sort of a desk jockey, but I understand that actually some of what she did is still classified.
Yeah, that's the reason I started laughing, because believe it or not, I can't talk about a lot of what she did. And I think that speaks volumes, because if it wasn't important to national security, I would be able to talk about it right now to the entire world. But it was. And so I can't go into a lot of details. What I can say is that one of the things that she did was sort of this idea of stay behind mission. So the United States was worried about a World War II situation happening again, or even a little bit later that the Soviets would invade parts of Europe. And so who better to figure out what we need in countries in case this happens than Virginia Hall. So she was working on sort of these stay behind missions of what are we going to leave in countries? Where are we going to leave it? Who are we going to tap to be involved, have all of that planned out in advance. I mean, she was so good at it when she was doing it during World War II. So that is one of the few things I can talk about in sort of generalities.
Well, you know, my mother has a little story of that little piece of information that came out that Virginia shared that did shine some light on sort of the scope and importance of the missions that she did work on.
Oh, when the Bay of Pigs occurred, and we were all sitting around talking about it, and she said, "Boy, I'm glad I wasn't on that project."
So much for classified.
Yeah.
That's right. Who divulged a secret?
I will say that Virginia, that's so funny. I will say that Virginia did get to travel, even though, yeah, you use the term desk jockey. That doesn't really exist for a paramilitary officer, which Virginia Hall was the CIA's first female paramilitary officer. So she was traveling overseas. She never took a permanent change of station. So she never, we don't have record of her applying for one though. So it wasn't like she was kept from doing those things. It could have been a work-life balance thing. Maybe Paul didn't want to move overseas. He liked it in the United States. Obviously I don't have insight to that, but we don't have anything that says she applied for one, but she did go on long-term temporary duty stations. So she would travel, for a few weeks, sometimes up to 6 months, doing some very important work for our organization that I, again, can't tell you about.
And they just recently named the education building after her.
So I can't go into detail about that either, but it does speak volumes about how, we have this painting, we have this new exhibit for low vision and the blind community. It speaks volumes about how important Virginia Hall is to us, because yes, we did name a very important education, I'll use that term, education center after her, because what she did is still studied by our officers today.
So maybe if we stay on a little longer, we'll find out about all of these classified.
Lorna will tell you.
Exactly. So since we're there, Lorna and Brad, did she ever talk about her time in World War II and her subsequent missions with the CIA, other than the non-mission to the Bay of Pigs?
Well, the CIA had me over for lunch to tell me about this building, and I said, well, where is it? And they said, oh, it's down there.
That place.
That's right. But if you're good with Google Maps, I might be able to tell you where it is.
I'm going to get fired.
So Erica, who is from Maryland, has a question for you, and that is, what do you think Virginia would think of all this attention now that more than 75 years have passed since the war? Lorna, what do you think?
Well, I'm amazed because after they had the gag rule for 25 years, and right after that, Judy Pearson's book appeared, and then nothing, except a couple years ago, all of a sudden, authors are calling right and left and writing books, and I don't know what stirred it up the second time. Do you?
Mom, do you think that Indy would have appreciated all the attention?
Oh, absolutely not.
No.
Her cover's been blown.
That's right.
In fact, one time I was there, and there was a lady in Chicago, I think, that was writing an article about her. And she said, look at this. And there were questions there. There were a lot of questions on the pages. She said, you fill it out. And so I did the best I could, and she'd helped me a little bit, but couldn't care less.
Well, and I realized after I'd done quite a bit of research that the only thing that we knew about Virginia's actual work in country was what was written on the certificate that Truman was supposed to have presented to her. Which tells you that she wasn't interested in divulging anything. And speaking of the Le Chambon area where she served on her second mission, right around D-Day, the people in that community, they were Huguenots. They were Protestants who had been repressed for hundreds of years, and they were very used to taking in refugees, and that's what they did. I recently saw a documentary on them, and what was remarkable to me was when they were asked, when they were asked whether they thought they were heroes, whether they thought that the other people in town were heroes, they very humbly shrugged their shoulders and said, we just did what we thought was the right thing to do. And it's almost the same words that Virginia would have used, that humility. And I think that she felt a great kinship with that group who, Nadia, as you said, saved 3,500 Jewish children during the war.
We have another question from California, from Lisa, actually. Can you talk about her personal motivation for assisting the Allies? Was there a strong ethical motivation aside from her allegiance to, it says her country, to her country? And I'm not sure whether she means by the question whether it's to her country, the US, or she's assuming her country, France. But basically, what was her personal motivation for assisting the Allies? Or was that?
Tom and I were talking about it just this afternoon. First of all, she had studied abroad, which was not a usual thing to do at that time, and spent a lot of time in France. And she fell in love with the French people, the French ways, and the French country. But that wasn't the only reason. We were talking about this this afternoon. What were you saying?
I think she just plain loved being a spy. I mean, when you think of it, she was athletic. She was always into crazy things. And she liked being under pressure, made her do things. I truly think she liked the occupation.
In a sense.
Well, in a sense.
It certainly drew on all of her talents. She had a very unique set of talents, and being a spy at that time put every one of them to work. And I think she felt really good about that.
I think too, Janelle, you and I have had side conversations where we've talked about her compassion, that even though she was a tough cookie, she was the perfect spy, so to speak, there was a part of her that was truly sensitive to what was going on in France at that time and what the Nazis were doing. Can you tell us a little bit perhaps more about that, about her hating evil?
Sure. I mean, I think that some of that is alluded to in the letters and the postcards that Lorna and Brad have that she sent back to her mother. I think she did very much have a kinship with the French people from spending time there. And so I think seeing the atrocities that she did put on any person would have affected her, but especially since she had such a strong connection to the French. She had this thing inside of her that was motivating her and pushing her to use her skills for good, right? It's the idea of good versus evil. And I mean, and I will say, because I think the question talked about sort of this idea of duty for your country. I think that definitely plays in there, both with her time serving in the SOE and with the OSS, but especially when she was at the CIA. And I can speak from, I guess, personal experience, but also from just the officers that I work with every day, that they're patriots. They really love this country and they care about what's going on in the world and trying to make it safer. And so I think that that's something that was in Virginia during the war and then was just amplified while at the CIA. There's this idea of, I have skills and I am going to use them to make this country safer.
I'd also add to that, Janelle, that we hear so often that people who go to war try not to get too close to the people around them because they could be missing the next day. I'm not sure that Virginia was capable of that. And because she was in country for so long and was responsible for all of these agents, I think that she carried that view of her responsibility to heart. It was what she lived for, and she couldn't help, I think, but feel close to the people that she worked with and all the people who were doing the heroic things that she was doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think the first thing she would have done after the war ended was asked to go back if she didn't care about people. I mean, that's just not something that people do unless they have this huge heart and they want to take care of, the people that they care about.
Well, as we're approaching the end of our time, I did want to come back to the March 2020 cover of Time magazine that included her in their list of 100 Women of the Year and named her as the perfect spy. Can we go to that Time magazine cover, please? As one journalist put it, this is all about Virginia. She could speak 5 languages, lie through her teeth, and slash an enemy in the throat with a knife. She did everything that the fictional James Bond could do, except in real life and with one leg. Janelle, thank you for joining us this evening. And special thanks to you, Lorna and Brad, for sharing vignettes and personal images that allowed us to get to know Virginia a little bit better. The public is learning more and more about the courageous women of the resistance during World War II. And you might enjoy watching the Women in World War II, the Spies They Never Saw Coming, part of our Facebook Live series, which aired on March 10th. It tells the stories of the heroism of performer Josephine Baker, Muslim pacifist Noor Khan, and the inimitable Virginia Hall. It is now my pleasure to introduce Marla Abraham, Director of the museum's Western Regional Office. Marla?
Thank you, Nadia. Thank you to the participants tonight. You were all wonderful. We have become super fans of Virginia Hall in the process of putting this together and learning more about her life. And she is a hero, no doubt. We hope all of you watching feel the same. We have guests tonight from all 10 states in the Western region and throughout the country. We have international guests tonight from United Kingdom, Spain, South Africa, Portugal, Nigeria, Israel, Germany, France, Canada, Brazil, and Australia. We are grateful for your participation and interest. Remember, individual actions and choices make the difference in confronting hate. Educating ourselves about the Holocaust and its history and sharing that with others is taking action. For more information on tonight's topic, resources will be listed in the chat function right after the program concludes. Please also watch your email for more of our upcoming virtual programs. To Linda and Tony Rubin, we are so blessed by your partnership and deeply grateful that the Rubin Lecture is a mainstay of our work here in the Western region of bringing the museum's mission closer to all of us. Your support and leadership make this possible. We hope those of you watching tonight will join the Rubins in investing in this work. On behalf of the whole Western region team and everyone who put together tonight's program together, thank you all for choosing to be with us and for sharing what you have learned tonight with others so that we can shape a future different from the past. Have a good evening and be safe. Thank you.